Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy Freaks and Geeks, what is up? This is the part 3 episode of the Week 13 edition of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. We got 9 AFC home games to get through here, and we're going to start it off with one of the two NFC visiting AFC teams, the Philadelphia Eagles at the Miami Dolphins. Eagles minus 10, it's a 44.5 point over-under right now. When you're talking about the Eagles, you got to start with these tight ends, Ertz and Goddard, who each played 85% of the snaps last week. They were the top two most targeted players on the team. Ertz with 12 catches on 14 targets for 91 yards and a touchdown. Dallas Goddard, he had, 7 catches on 8 targets for 32 yards, and he lost a fumble, which was his second lost fumble of the year. The Eagles are going to continue to use these two tight ends until Alshon Jeffrey and Jordan Howard come back, and even then I think they are still the best options in the pass game. I think they're really the only two playmakers that the Eagles have right now. Jordan Matthews was cut after last week's game. The Eagles must be pretty confident that Jeffrey's going to be able to play. Matthews has had 2 targets, and he's played he's had 6 targets in the last 2 games, and he's played 86 and then 97% of the snaps in those 2 games. So with him gone, someone is going to have to fill that role. If Alshon Jeffrey goes again, then they should be fine. But if he doesn't go, then I think this kid, Greg Ward, is a desperation flyer that's worth a play in FanDuel at least. He had the 3rd most targets and catches on the team last week, and he looked like the best wide receiver to me watching that Eagles game. So maybe he's someone that you can stash on in your FanDuel lineup for $5,500 or whatever he costs, and really make some money for you. So looking at the running backs here, so they just signed Jay Ajayi back to the team before last week's game. He did only see 6 touches, but for a guy that hasn't been on the field in over a year, it makes sense. And he couldn't have asked for a better team to join this late in the season, considering he's playing up against the Dolphins. So I'm sure he's going to be feeling a little revenge in this game. I went back and I looked at the drive summary of the Eagles, and it was not pretty. So their first drive, 3 and out and a punt. Second drive, JJ did see a 3rd and 1 carry for 6 yards, so that's good. In the red zone, he also saw a 1st and 10 carry. He was only able to pick up 1 yard. They ended up having to kick the field goal, but considering his first game back and they gave him the ball on a 3rd down and on the goal line, tells me that it seems like he's going to be their short yardage goal line back going forward. But like I said, going through this drive summary, in their 3rd drive, Wentz was sacked and he fumbled. 4th drive, he threw an interception, followed by 2 more punts. They come out of halftime and they botch the snap, so it was technically another Eagle turnover. First drive after halftime, they came out, they looked good. 2 7 and 8 yard runs by Sanders, followed by 5 completions by Wentz, but then another turnover. Their 8th drive, 2nd and 1 at midfield. Jay gets the carry again. He converts, but they end up having a punt. In their 9th drive is when Goddard had his fumble. So they just, throughout the entire first 3 quarters of the games, the Eagles were just shooting themselves in the foot constantly. In the 10th drive with 5 minutes to go, the game on the line, Wentz completed 4 straight passes to Ertz for 42 yards. And then again, while targeting Jordan Matthews, Another interception was thrown, which that was pretty much the nail in the coffin. The Eagles did have one more possession at the end of the game with a chance to win, but they were down 8 with 2:30 to go. And 8 straight completions for 80 yards and a touchdown. And this was another heavily tight end used drive there. And I just don't understand why the Eagles waited until the fourth quarter to use these two guys. So very surprising to me. But this Dolphins team is really bad at defending pretty much every single position. So the Eagles shouldn't have any trouble putting up some points. Talking about the Dolphins here, it's really just Devontae Parker, and that's it for Miami. The Eagles allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, so he does have a good matchup. He's been the most consistent player for them pretty much all year now. He's another guy that's probably not too expensive on FanDuel that you can get away with playing, and he's somebody that if you're really, really desperate in your seasonal leagues, which you shouldn't be at this point with all the buys over, but, if you're dealing with injuries or whatever, you can probably get away with playing him. All right, the next game here, Tampa Bay at Jacksonville, battle of the two 4-7 Florida football teams. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, both with 8 targets last week. First time all season that they saw the same target share in a game. Jameis Winston targeted 8 other players besides those 2 big wide receivers. The Bucs were also able to run the ball 34 times, which is well over their average attempts per game this season of, I think it was 25 or 26. 6 different Buccaneers carried the ball for a combined 133 yards. The Jaguars allowed the 10th most rushing yards to quarterbacks. We just saw Winston averaging 5 yards a carry. 38 of those 133 rushing yards were from Jameis Winston on 8 carries. So I think Jameis might bust that out again. Maybe it's something that they kind of throw a couple wrinkles into the game plan at some point and call a couple design plays with Jameis Winston. So the Bucs really spread the ball around last week, both in the air and on the ground, and the offense really seemed to be clicking. It's so amazing it's just crazy to think what this offense could be if Jameis Winston wasn't throwing multiple interceptions in, I think it's 6 games so far this year now. But Ronald Jones continues to show that he's the better running back in Tampa Bay. Last week, Jones with 12 carries. Peyton Barber only 11 carries. Jones with 20 more rushing yards on 1 more attempt, plus the only rushing touchdown of the day. Jones caught all 3 of his targets for an extra 16 yards, whereas Peyton Barber couldn't catch his only target. So as each week goes by, we just keep seeing more evidence that Ronald Jones is the better running back. So you got to think eventually the full workload is gonna just get transferred over to him, and he's gonna stop having to split carries. But maybe it won't happen until next year. The Bucs running backs have a good matchup with the Jaguars. They're allowing the 7th most fantasy points to running backs. I'm stuck deciding between Ronald Jones and Darrell Williams in a half PPR league, who should see a lot more use in this week with Damian Williams now officially out. So I'm probably going to have to wait until Sunday morning to make that decision, and it's not going to be a fun one to make. Right now I'm kind of leaning more towards Darrell Williams just because I'm expecting him to be a little more used in the passing game. These are both 2 really good offenses that are going to put up points, so it's going to be a tough decision for sure. Looking at the Jaguars, Fournette with his season high in touches last week with 33 in a very strange game. The Jags got absolutely bitch slapped by the Titans. So if you go back and you look, the Titans scored 28 points in 6 minutes of the third quarter. It was crazy. So after halftime, the Titans got a big 36-yard return on the kick, then a deep connection from Tannehill to A.J. Brown for 36 yards, followed by a 17-yard pass interference call with Derrick Henry throwing the ball to Jonnu Smith, then a touchdown pass to the backup offensive tackle in Dennis Kelly. So a very strange series of events there leading up to the touchdown after the first half. But then following that, the Jaguars go 3-and-out and they punt. And on the first play for the Titans after that punt, Derrick Henry scores on a 74-yard touchdown run. 20 seconds later, Derrick Henry scores another touchdown after a fumble by the Tennessee Titans on the kickoff. Again, the Jaguars go 3 and out and punt after that. And again, the Titans go get back the ball, and they score on a 65-yard touchdown bomb to A.J. Green. So, like I said, in 5 or 6 minutes, they scored 28 points, which is absolutely crazy for an offense that, for the first half of this season, looked pretty stagnant. Looked like that would be far out of the reach of something that they could pull off, but they did it. So usually running backs kind of fall out of the game plan after the team gives up that many points, but Leonard Fournette saw 7 of his team-high 12 targets after that huge 28-point explosion, which is very encouraging as a Leonard Fournette owner in one of my leagues. So yes, the Bucs have a great run defense, but he's so involved in the passing game that you definitely can't get away from Leonard Fournette. He's 5th in the league right now amongst running backs in targets, so all the more reason you keep him in no matter what. Looking at the Jaguars wide receivers, they have an awesome matchup here. The Bucs allow the most fantasy points to wide receivers and the second most to both tight ends and quarterbacks. So all around, Buccaneers pass game is very bad. The Jaguars have 4 tight ends out on that are either out or on the IR right now. Nick O'Leary caught all 4 of his targets last week, so maybe he's a tight end sleeper for you this week if you're looking for a dirt cheap tight end in FanDuel. But the wide receivers should be good this week. Dede Westbrook, Chris Conley tied for second on the team in targets last week with 9 each. Dede Westbrook catching 8 of them to Conley's 4 catches. So Dede Westbrook definitely was the more efficient wide receiver. DJ Shark had a 6.5 point game, and it was the 3rd time this year with 6.5 points or less following a game that he saw double-digit targets. So every time he has one of these big games, he follows it with a not-so-good game. He's been very inconsistent. And like I said a few weeks ago when Nick Foles was returning, I said he's not going to have a favorite target. He's not going to, funnel all of his targets to one guy. He plays quarterback like a point guard. He's going to distribute the ball. He's going to find the open guy. And there's going to be weeks where, maybe only one of these 3 wide receivers actually plays well and the other 2 guys don't play so well. But that's what you have to expect when you're rolling with an offense that has somebody like Nick Foles at the helm. He's not gonna look for one guy every time. All right, moving on to the Jets at the Bengals. So Jets -3. This is a 41.5 point over/under. I'm interested in that, but I think I'm more so interested in the home team under 19.5. Only 2 games this year with over 17 points, and they were with Dalton as the starter. The Bengals average 15.5 points a game with Andy Dalton as the starter. So if you haven't heard, the Andy Dalton will be starting at quarterback for the Bengals. They're going back to their first-string quarterback. Some people are saying that they think it's because the owners want them to at least get 1 win here and not go into week 16 and 17 as one of the teams that could possibly lose every game in a season. So they're bringing Andy Dalton back. During the first 8 games of the season, Tyler Boyd had a 25% target share, and he had the most targets, catches, receiving yards, and air yards. So he was clearly the number 1 option in the pass game, and Andy Dalton threw to him a lot. He gets another little boost considering how well the Jets have been at defending against the run. They give up the 9th fewest fantasy points to running backs right now. So I'm sitting Joe Mixon, and the wide receivers definitely have the better matchup for the Bengals. The Jets are giving up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I think I'm going to roll Tyler Boyd out there, and if I'm really desperate, I can roll out Alex Erickson as well. Looking at the Jets, Le'Veon Bell with 100-plus total yards in 6 of his 7 career games against the Bengals. Granted, they were all when he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but hey, stats are stats. The Bengals will allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, so I'm looking for a good game from Le'Veon. Robbie Anderson with back-to-back games with a touchdown, but I'm not going to let myself get fooled by him. He's got 8 games this year with under 45 receiving yards, and 6 of those 8 games he had under 25 receiving yards. So he's been extremely boomer bust, and it's been way too many busts and nowhere near enough booms, so I'm staying away from him. Ryan Griffin, who's also got 2 games in a row with a touchdown, and he's got a really good matchup. The Bengals are the 10th easiest defense to score on as far as tight ends go. Jamison Crowder was playing really well. Had a nice string of a couple games, but last week kind of fell off. Only saw 4 targets, which concerns me. The Bengals' pass defense is really not all that bad. At least they're not that bad against defending wide receivers. So I think I might stay away from the Jet wide receivers and just kind of roll with with Ryan Griffin and hope that the Jets kind of focus on running the ball and getting the ball to the tight end spot. Next, we got the Patriots at the Texans. So the Pats are minus 3.5. It's a 45.5 point over/under. The Texans allow the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. So Sonny Michel should be able to have a good game. He should have at least the opportunity. If he sees the touches, he's had 4 games with 20 or more carries, and the 4 of the 5 of his best games so far as yardage goes. So if they give him the carries, he's usually not that bad. The Texans also allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers, so Edelman should be another PPR machine like he always is. N'Keal Harry caught his first touchdown of the season last week. He was their first-round wide receiver. Wasn't really able to play until about 2 weeks ago. But Jacoby Myers, however you say it, has really been the more productive rookie wide receiver for the Patriots. I think he's the other Patriots wide receiver that I'd play if I had to pick one. He's definitely developing some type of chemistry with Tom Brady. He saw the 2nd most targets on the team last week, although he only caught 4 of 9. He did have 74 yards, so maybe worth a dart throw, you know. Looking at the Texans, this should be an awesome game all around. The one team that beat the Patriots did it with a quarterback that could move around. The only other quarterback in the league I think that can come close to mimicking the Ravens offense and the Ravens quarterback particularly is Deshaun Watson. The tight ends and the wide receivers couldn't be any more different for the Ravens, but head coach Bill O'Brien, who comes from the Patriot coaching tree, he's a smart guy. I'm sure they will try and get some things. They'll try and do some things that the Ravens were successful with when they faced the Patriots. I'm staying away from the Texans running backs, but of course sticking with DeAndre Hopkins. He's the man. It's going to be interesting to see who Stephon Gilmore plays. Do the Pats put him on Hopkins and then double Will Fuller, or do they double Hopkins and then put Gilmore on Fuller? Definitely interesting situation, and I'm very much excited for that game. Next, we got the Browns at the Steelers. Browns minus 1.5, and it's a 39.5 point over/under. I think I'm going to take the under on this game. Browns going up against a pretty good defense, and the Steelers going with their 3rd-string quarterback, which we'll get to, but I want to start with the Brownies here. Chubb, Hunt, OBJ, and Landry are all starters no matter what this week, especially despite the Steelers being pretty good on defense, especially against running backs. They give up the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So, but honestly, I don't think it really matters for these guys. Hunt's got he has 20 targets in the first 3 games as a Brown, and Chubb gets his 20 touches no matter what. It doesn't matter what the matchup is he's going to get his touches. And with Baker Mayfield coming off of his best game of the season, I'm sure everybody's confidence is through the roof right now. The 2 wide receivers should continue to see their targets. Last week was the first game that both Landry and OBJ both had a touchdown, so that's a good thing for the Browns for sure. Looking at the Steelers, with James Conner doubtful to play, Benny Snell should get the start again at running back. The Steelers have announced that Devlin Hodges will start at quarterback, so Snell should see plenty of work. All 3 of the players who were involved in the Week 11 brawl are all out of this game, so I doubt anything will happen as far as that goes. This is a very important game for the AFC playoff picture. I think if the Browns lose, they can pretty much kiss their season goodbye. And if the Steelers lose, then it kind of opens the door for the Brownies, and it makes the AFC North a hell of a lot more interesting. I think the Ravens have already somewhat run away with it, but at least figuring out what teams and what divisions are still alive as far as putting in a team for the wild card goes. James Washington has been the best wide receiver for the Steelers lately. He's got 90 yards and a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 games. Juju is again out for this game this week, but I'm staying away from the Steelers pass game altogether with the third-string quarterback making a start. Browns defense is really not all that bad. They give up the 10th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers right now, so it's really not a good matchup either, which is why I think I'm feeling pretty good about that 39.5 point over-under. I'm going to add that to my list in the morning. Moving on to another division game here. We got the Titans going up against the Colts. They're both 6-5. Titans getting 1.5. It's a 42.5 point over-under right now. Yes, A.J. Brown had a nice game last week, but he's only got 1 game with over 4 catches this season, only 1 game with more than 7 targets. This Titan offense is just so run-centric, which is why I think Derrick Henry is really the only guy worth playing. If you were listening to the breakdown 2 games ago, Derrick Henry blew up, as he usually does, when you give him the touches that they've been giving him lately. 19 carries, and let's see, he caught his only target, so 20 touches, 160 yards, really 175 total yards, so he's been great. You're going to keep playing him no matter what. Even though the Colts allow the 5th fewest fantasy points, Derrick Henry is a beast, and you play him. With Eric Ebron on IR, with T.Y. Hilton and Marlon Mack both out this week, the Colts will have to get by without their best player at each of the skill positions. This has been a very difficult year for the Colts, but they're still 6-5 and they're still alive. So Jonathan Williams has looked good in his last 2 games, averaging 130 yards a game over the past 2 games. The Titans are in the middle of the pack as far as their defense against the run game. So Williams should be good again with a lot of work. I don't think they want to get Jacoby Brissett throwing the ball anything over 25, 26 times. So should see plenty of the running game again in this one. Jack Doyle should also see a lot of work, a lot of targets in this game. The Titans allow the 9th most fantasy points to tight ends as well, so should be an awesome game for Doyle now with Eric Ebron out of the way, and with T.Y. Hilton not playing, Jack Doyle will probably be the main focus in the passing game. All right, moving on to the Chargers at the Broncos, another division game. Chargers are -3, and it's a 38.5 point over-under. This is another one that I'm interested in solely because of how good the Broncos' defense is. Chargers are the away team, although they're coming off of a bye, which I don't really like as far as betting on unders. But the one thing in this game that I am 100% going to bet is the home team under, which is 17.5 points. The Broncos' offense looked absolutely atrocious last week. So they got beat up by the Bills 20-3. And the Chargers' defense is really not all that bad either. 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, 4th fewest to wide receivers. They do get kind of beat up by running backs. The Broncos will need to really lean on the run game if they want to win this game. The Chargers allow the 8th most fantasy points to running backs. They're also allowing the 10th most receiving yards to running backs. And the Broncos running backs saw a 20% target share last week. So I'm going to assume that goes up in this game. The one player or 2 players I'm kind of worried about for the Broncos is Cortland Sutton, who will have another crappy game versus this 4th-ranked defense in fewest fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. However, Michael Davis, the starting corner opposite Casey Hayward, has been suspended, so that might help Cortland Sutton. Maybe if the Broncos can move him around enough, he should be okay, but I think I'm going to stay away from him. And apparently Derwin James is on track to return this week as well. If you guys don't remember him from last year, he was kind of a tight end eraser. Noah Fant has kind of come on lately for the Broncos, but I think if Derwin James is going to play, then I don't expect Noah Fant to really do anything. Going over to the Chargers, the Broncos' pass defense is much better than their run defense. They've allowed the Bills to rush for 244 yards 2 weeks ago, so I think the Chargers come out of the bye and they run the ball. I think Phillip Rivers has really struggled lately. I think the team, after their bye week, is going to sit down, look at film, and really say, we need to help Phillip out more, and the best way to do that is to run the ball. So coming out of this bye, hopefully they've spent some time tightening things up. I'm not counting on anything from the Chargers skill position players really, except for the 2 RBs and Hunter Henry. Yes, Keenan Allen finally scored last week, but the offense has just looked just not good at all. I think they're really going to try and just come out and run the ball and get out of Denver with a win. All right, next, another in our last division game here. Raiders at Chiefs. Raiders getting 10.5 points. It's a 51-point over-under. This one's kind of simple for me, at least for the Chiefs go. If Tyreek Hill is active, you're starting him. He's healthy right now. He's no longer on the injury report. Kelsey is an obvious start no matter what, no matter who the matchup is. And it doesn't hurt that the Raiders give up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. I'm going to be doing another probably 2 or 3 different 3-legged parlays for anytime TD scores for the tight end position. There's a lot of good tight ends that have really good matchups this week. If Tyreek Hill does not play, which I'm not expecting to happen, but in case, Micah Hardman and Watkins will also have good matchup with the Raiders, giving up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Although Demarcus Robinson did nothing with his only target in Week 11, when these two teams played in Week 2, there was no Tyreek Hill, and Demarcus Robinson caught all 6 of his targets for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. So if Tyreek Hill doesn't play, I think Robinson is the man, especially in FanDuel. I got the Chiefs in my knockout pool this week. Last year, coming off of the bye, they put up 40 points on the Raiders. So I think this is a Chiefs big time win here. The Raiders running back should see a lot of work this game. Chiefs allow the 6th most receptions, the most receiving yards, and the most fantasy points to running backs. So Jacobs only had 12 touches in their last game. I don't think that happens again. I think the Raiders focus on getting the run game going early. Unfortunately, if the Raiders do fall behind, though, it's going to be Jalen Richard and not Josh Jacobs. Jalen Richard led the team in targets last week while trailing the Jets pretty much all game. So I think Richard is a great sleeper this week as well. His matchup and the absence of Hunter Henry, who is out, who also had about 6 targets a game for a month now, I think it makes Jalen Richard a solid play. All right, last game for these AFC home games here on Part 3 of the Week 13 episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast is what should be the best game of the year, in my opinion. I'm very much excited about this game. I got a family party to go to tomorrow afternoon, but I am recording this game. I'm not touching my phone throughout the entire party, so I don't see any updates. I might even turn it off. I don't know. But I'm definitely going to be recording this game, and I'm coming home, and I'm watching every snap because I can't wait to see this game. It's going to be awesome. 2 of the best defenses, 2 of the more fun offenses to watch. It's the Super Bowl 49 rematch, I think, 49ers-Ravens. 2 extremely different teams than they were when they last faced off. So looking at the 49ers, I was pretty surprised to see that the 49ers are really just Telvin Coleman, struggling to run the ball against the Packers last week. Coleman with only 40 yards on 11 carries and another 10 yards from his 2 catches on 4 targets. Meanwhile, Raheem Mostert had 67 yards on his 7 touches, and I think Matt Breida returns this week. You can't really play any one of them. I think they all just kind of cannibalize themselves when every one of them is playing. They're all good enough as RB2s, but only really if one of them is out. Jeff Wilson, the fourth guy in San Francisco, even he is involved enough to hurt the other three. Manny Sanders played on 32 snaps last week, but only had one target. He's probably still hurt. Rib injuries don't just go away. So I'm sitting him versus the Ravens, who have just been mauling opposing wide receivers. Since week 8, when Emmanuel Sanders was traded to San Francisco, Deebo Samuels has kept the offense, or at least the pass game, float. He's led the 49ers in targets, receptions, air yards, and receiving yards. With Kittle returning last week after missing 2 games, Deebo only saw 2 targets, but luckily one of them was for a touchdown in the second quarter. But I don't know if you can really start him versus these Ravens cornerbacks who are very good and they're very physical. So I think I'm going to stay away from the the San Francisco 49er offense altogether. It's just the running backs are all too good for the team to give the lion's share of the carries to any one guy, and with such little opportunity, I don't think any one of them is really worth playing. Unless it comes out that Breida is hurt again, then I think Mostert and Coleman are both worth playing for sure. Lamar Jackson continues his insane efficiency streak. 5 touchdown passes on 15 completions last week. His last 3 games, his touchdown percentage, 18% in week 10, 16% in week 11, then 33% last week, which is absolutely insane. When he's not throwing a touchdown on every third pass, he's averaging 7 yards a carry, which is also pretty insane. He's 9th right now in the league in rushing yards as a quarterback. If you really want to know what kind of impact he's having on the opposing defense, just look at his running backs. So Mark Ingram is 12th in the league in rushing. And when you look at the league leader in yards per carry, you'll see Lamar Jackson is first. And then if you go down to 4th and 5th on the list, it's both of his running backs, Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards. So that means in the top 5 rushers in the season right now, 3 of the 5 are Baltimore Ravens. That's just wild to me. It's a crazy stat. It tells you just what kind of impact Lamar Jackson has on the run game and what opposing defenses have to do when you have a quarterback that can run the ball. It just completely opens up the lanes for your other rushers. This team is built so much on pre-play, pre-action snaps and or pre-snap actions, fakes and motions and whatnot. So it's very difficult to pick up who is actually carrying the ball. And by the time you do pick it up, these guys are already 10 yards downfield. So they're just gashing people in the run game. This should be the best game of the year. 2 awesome defenses. There's really no advantages or good matchups in this game. You play your studs like Ingram and Andrews. I think you play Marquise Brown now too. I think he's become one of the most solid boom or bust guys, but his boom potential has become that of like a Tyreek Hill or a Stephon Diggs. Any guy that can catch 2 touchdown passes on only 5 catches is definitely boom or bust, but he's had plenty of really good games this season, so I think he's worth playing as well, even though the 49ers allow the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. I'm not getting scared away, though. So that does it. Thank you so much for tuning in for the AFC home game previews. I hope you got some good information here. This is, for a lot of leagues, the last week of the regular season, so got to get wins here if we want to secure our playoff spot, and I hope this podcast has helped you do so. So make sure you check in next week and check us out. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.